So, I've been thinking about cities for a while now, specifically making maps of fictional cities. I've always loved road maps and have made many fictional cities in the past. I've come to realize that the first step in my process is creating the topography. Usually, this was more for setting up where the coastline and rivers are, as most settlements are found on a source of fresh water, a river or a lake typically, and many cities rely on the ocean for trade. More recently, watching videos of people playing with city building simulation games, I am always noticing how topography shapes the design, whether the person is aware of this or not. On a flat plain, cities tend to be circular, such as in the prairies, with limits placed by the topography. For example, this map of Mexico City shows a mountain ridge blocking the southwest side of the city, so more expansion seems to occur towards the northeast. However, in looking at online resources, I find there are very few tools for generating topography. This picture of Mexico City was the only result I could find with a quick Google search that showed both topography and a city. Now, I suspect this has to do with method, that most people who like to draw fictional cities start with the city and figure out topography later, or come up with topography on the spot while creating the city as part of the creative process. But for a while now, I've been thinking of ways to generate topography in Excel and later Python. I think this might be an interesting project for myself and something much simpler than my app design project. So, let's make it. Alright, so I decided to first prototype my ideas in Excel. Now, using a simple random number generator to generate a height map doesn't really work because you end up with this chaotic mess of heights that doesn't really make sense as a topography. Most of the time, topographies are smooth, and yeah, this is very much not smooth. So, my idea was to generate several height maps at varying sizes and add them together at different weightings. This generated a much smoother height map, which feels more like an actual topographic map. I also included a slope bias chart, essentially, that gives, a slope bias as instead of just being a flat plane. So, I also have an example one, which I drew topography lines along to show how a height map can be extrapolated into a topographic map and topographic features, such as rivers and lakes. Finally, I also have this number chart, I guess you could call it, as when we move into Python, this data will have to be encoded into some sort of list, and by following this specific path, which I believe has a mathematical name that I'll have to look up later, it basically means that that not only can you put random numbers into every number slot, but then every 4 number slots gives you the second number map, every 16 gives you the third, and the full 64 gives you the 8x8 grid. This seems to be working, at least in Excel, and therefore I will be implementing this basic concept into Python. Okay, so starting off with Python, the main system that I'm going to be using for displaying the results will be what's called tkinter. It's basically pops up a small window to display information. So I'll just quickly... So the first thing, I guess, with Python is the libraries. In this case, I'm thinking random and tkinter will be the main ones we'll be using. Now, libraries are kind of complicated. It's the pip function in the command line to import them, but every time I've downloaded Python onto a new system, I've had trouble figuring out how to get that to work, and honestly, I still don't know how I get it to work. I just sort of do after about an hour of Googling, so I wish I could help with that, but unfortunately, I don't really know how that works. Just be aware that it's a bit complicated. Also, wait, why is that there? I should move that over here. Okay, there we go. Um, yeah, um, those two functions are basically just, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So I did configuration for Tkinter stuff off screen just because I figured that would make it easier than watching me do it again and again. I was thinking I'd do all of this on screen, but I realized that will probably be a longer video given that I seriously misjudge how long these updates take. So yeah, but basically for the decanter formatting, um, you well, I've set it up with frame left and frame right. Um, I figured the frame right stuff will be controls for basically um, like the different weightings and stuff from the previous examples, with the frame left being the main window. Um, for both of these, you have the TK frame master window and set your width and height and background color optionally. All of the things after the window setup is optional. Like if you don't include it, it'll just be default, which is really nice. You don't have to define everything. Then for the .pack function, one thing that I relearned today is where you have that expand equals true. That means that it will fill the screen, whereas if you have that off, it will not it'll stay the same size, which is very useful for when you're trying to make controls and a main screen, which is why frame right does not have that. Finally, there's the column and row configures where you have that 0, 1 thing that sets up the number of rows, again starting with 0 because computers always start at 0. And so, in this case, frame left has a 2x2 grid and frame right has a 1x2 grid. Then, under Setup Interactive, I designated a label and a button for row 1 and a label and button for row 2. For the labels, I use the format LBL underscore for naming just so that it's easier to tell which is which. That's something I learned when doing Flash years ago, Adobe Flash stuff. And for that, so yeah, for the labels, it's tk.label. You select which frame it's in, the text, and the background color. Whereas for a button, it's a bit more complicated because you need to include the command line, which is where those functions come in, which I currently have empty because otherwise it won't work if you don't have the functions, and a foreground color because you need to see the text on your buttons. That's kind of important. Finally, there's the interactive grid space section where you designate where each button goes in the different grids. So you have, well, sort of. It's odd because the .grid function designates row and column, but the .label thing decides which frame it goes into, so it's kind of, you have to jump back and forth between them. I suppose you could also try and weave it in, like this formatting isn't necessary. You can put, as long as you do like the configure space frame left stuff first, it doesn't really matter if you do this, if you do set up the label functions first or all at once or interlace the two. Just make sure that you define the label or button first and then the .grid function. So what this basic framework does, I'll show you on the side of the screen. Since if I try to run it, it'll probably stop my recording. So it is here, I assume, with essentially a label, button, and then another label. And so yeah, I'll be back with the updated code for what we saw in Excel. Well, that was a lot more work than I expected. Copying labels 63 times to create this grid took a lot longer than I expected. I really do underestimate the amount of time it takes for these things, huh? Anyways, yeah, I've got the grid now listed out. So all I have to do now is when I make the actual lists and everything, I can just copy paste like label 0 into 0, 0, list 1 into point 1, etc. And then on the other side, I have 10 buttons essentially. Each one will control the weight of the respective groupings. So you have the 1 by 1, the 2 by 2, 4 by 4, and 8 by 8, and then also the slope function. So you can turn it off or on as well, and of course a go button. I'm also thinking that that these 8 by 8 grid doesn't do anything on an 8 by 8 grid, it just elevates it up a bit. But what it can do, if I put 4 of these grids next to each other, essentially, it's probably going to be a bit more work now that I think about it, but it will actually, but I can then just do 16, or do 4 copies of what I'm currently working on, and have 4 times the area, 4 times the resolution, I guess you could say. So that's sort of a end goal plan. We'll see if I have time to get to that. But yeah, the next stage will be actually making the height map stuff. So I'll see you then. Okay, I've added in some functions for the buttons now, so they actually will increase the number that's associated with them for the weights. The code for that is pretty straightforward, I guess. Well, I copied it from previous codes that I've done, so that was not too difficult, just copy paste, obviously. But yeah, basically it's 10 functions, but really just 2 because I did the same function 5 times. I would have done it once per increase and decrease, but that I needed to be able to change each weighting separately, and so I ended up needing 5 functions. There's probably a way to do that that's more efficient, but oh well. The increase function is basically it takes the current label text, adds 1, and pastes it back. So that's simple, but the decrease one adds an if statement, which checks if taking away 1 would make it less than 0, and if so, then make sure that it's 1 so it becomes 0 and stays at 0, basically, so you don't get negative numbers. And yeah, that's basically it for that. Then I'll also just show the number of labels that I already have for the 64, and if I do end up making the 4 times that, then that means 4 times all of this, with all of these numbers having to be input, like calculated and input specifically. So yeah, I'll see you in the next update when I have the array systems sorted. Okay, I think I figured this out. So I'll just go through the code top to bottom, sort of. So first I'm defining 6 arrays now. The total array, a slope array that basically, well, in the original it's 1 through 7, and then I bring it down to a 0 to 1 scale with rounded to 2 digits, just so that it doesn't get crazy with your digits at the end. Yeah, with too many decimal points. Then defining the 4 random arrays and making functions for each, which first clears the function, or the old array, so that you don't end up just stacking more stuff off screen, sort of. Then each one takes a certain range, which decreases, so that you have less numbers, but then also this second 4j in range makes it so that you put it into more spaces, essentially making that wider resolution thing that I showed in Excel. Not sure if that fully makes sense, but you'll see a demonstration in a moment. And then there's the array go function, which, I mean, yeah, basically just calls those four functions and then makes the array total. I currently have it set as array2, so that's the 2 by 2 function. And currently only three spots get changed right now, just because otherwise that's, well, I'm going to have to do it, but that's going to be another 61 more things to change, so that's going to take a while. I'll show the final result when I'm done with that, but for now, I'm going to show first the array 2 by 2 and 1 by 1 right now. Okay, I've actually done those 61 things, so now this array should be working completely instead of just the 3 that I was planning on showing. So let's press the go button, and you now have a bunch of random numbers, and you can change them. This is the 1 by 1 array specifically. Also, before I move on to the 2 by 2, I just want to show the buttons on the right side, just because I don't think I showed them last time. Basically, yeah, so you can increase the number, and each one separately, and then you can decrease, but not past 0. So yeah, I'll now show the 2 by 2 version of this same array thing, and we'll go from there. This then should be the 2 by 2, so when I press go, similar sort of things, except now each 2 by 2 has the same number. So these will all be overlaid in the next step and then weighted according to the numbers on the side, and hopefully I'll be able to fully demo this in just a few moments. Okay, I think I've got it figured out. So I'll just quickly run through how this looks now. The initial array is still the same, but now I'll set the 1 by 1 grid to, and I can't quite see under the recording button, but I think this is 10, so I'll press that, and now you get a random field for that. Then for a 2 by 2, now each 2 by 2 grid is the same, and I'll demo the next one as a 3 by 3, or 4 by 4 I guess, so now you have 4 different fields, and, well, if I just do this, it'll be just a uniform field, and finally for the slope, you have, yeah, this slope function. So I'll set these as 4, 8, 4, 2, and 1, because I think that gets the best combination of some slope but not dominated by slope, and then having the actual field. Although I guess this one doesn't have to be 8, given that it doesn't change anything aside from the baseline numbers, so I'll put that as 0, and press go. And now we have a random number field, and actually it should be showing decimal places. I'll have to look into that next time. But yeah, you now have like a low point down in this corner and some high points down in this corner. Okay, so in terms of code, everything is pretty much the same as before. So import libraries, set up the arrays with their functions. Then you have I set up the constants to and the arrays to create the array total spreadsheet, which then has all of this stuff to populate the fields. The increase and decrease number functions are the same as before, as are the decanter labels. So I think everything is done on that end, and I now am thinking I'll show how this will work in theory. Okay, Once again, I have severely underestimated how long this video is. So yeah, I'm just going to run through how one would take this screen and convert it into a topographic map. So, as I mentioned previously, you have a low zone in this corner and a high zone over on this end of the screen. So, what I first did was mark the lines basically between each of the numbers for lines of equal height, which you can see here. I decided to draw it this way. Yeah. Now, it is still kind of blocky, I noticed, especially this top section here, because these are all done in blocks, and you can kind of see that as well. Like, there are a bunch of lines running, like, making a plus sign in the middle. So that's sort of a bug that needs to be worked out eventually. However, this still makes a reasonable topography that can be worked with later. From this, I then colored in the areas so that you then have a height map. So yeah, I imagine that this would be a sort of bay and mountain pass kind of city where the main bulk would be by this bay, essentially, and then the city would expand along the valley up to the north. So yeah, I guess that's the system that I've done for this month. Quite happy that one, that it works, unlike the other project, and two, that it's something that I can use in future projects. So yeah, I guess that's it for this month. I'll see you in the next one. Really need to make an outro for this.